Fuck around, make my 40 pop.
Alright guys, this episode right here was absolutely insane. A bunch of information. The fighting scenes were good. Just a very good, well-rounded episode. I hope you guys liked it as much as I did as well. Now, the first thing that I do want to get to has to be the actual fighting scene. Kashin Koji versus Jigen Isshiki, because I believe this right here might have actually been the biggest draw to this actual episode. Now, we understand exactly how strong the other members of the Kata organization are, but for a character like Kashin Koji, the manga readers know exactly why he's such a special character. We want to know exactly how strong he actually could have been. Now, the interesting part about this is that the anime made Kashin Koji seem a lot more in control than he did seem in the Boruto manga, which kind of makes me believe that he's actually as strong as what we actually thought he was. Now, first things first, we have to understand that Jigen coming to this battle was extremely weak, and he's about less than 10% of his chakra. What I would kind of liken this to is back when Sasuke actually did fight against Urashiki. If you guys do recall, Urashiki stole about over 90% of Sasuke's chakra. Usually when Urashiki would do something like that, the person would just automatically faint. But Sasuke, because he was completely different, he was still able to move around and still able to actually utilize a tiny bit of jutsus and of course engage in some taijutsu. Sasuke was extremely weakened, but he was still functional. I think that right there is definitely what Jigen is as of right now. But regardless, Kashin Koji in this fight was absolutely amazing. I think one of the biggest things that we can obviously understand is that he loves the shadow clone jutsus. Not only that, he fights a lot like Jiraiya. One of the things that was very anticipated from this episode was the fact that Naruto did actually say that Kashin Koji fights like ... In the Boruto anime, we actually thought that they might actually add the name Jiraiya in there, because obviously everybody here knows that Kashin Koji fights a lot like Jiraiya. I don't know why the Boruto writers are still trying to hide at this particular point, but it was still very clear to everybody that was actually watching the show. My personal opinion, power scaling wise, like, let's be honest, a lot of people do want to know exactly how strong I think Kashin Koji is. I'd kind of liken Kashin Koji to Jigen without the karma. Now, manga readers know Kashin Koji potentially didn't necessarily show us all of his abilities yet, so that right there could possibly put him above Jigen without the karma seal. And obviously we still do have to understand that Jigen without the karma seal is still very much lacking in chakra. But regardless, a lot of things that Jigen was actually doing in this particular chapter right here dealt a lot with taijutsu. And from when we see when Sasuke was actually going up against Urashiki, his taijutsu wasn't necessarily that much effective. So I could kind of see, you know, I wouldn't necessarily say Kashin Koji is all the way up there like he's completely past Jigen without the karma seal, but I'd put him kind of on that level, if you guys get my drift. But one of the biggest parts about this episode has to be the information that Amado did actually talk about. I said this on multiple occasions. When I was actually watching this during the time of the Boruto manga, my head was in shambles. I had absolutely no idea how to interpret all of this stuff. For example, I think one of the biggest things that we have to understand right now is the fact that a lot of things that we did learn in the Naruto series wasn't necessarily 100% accurate. And I say this for a very good reason. People who told the story of Kaguya Boruto and Naruto, they were not there from the beginning. Now, obviously, Amado himself was not completely there from the beginning, and information from him might not be 100% reliable either, but he's talking above everybody's heads right now, because Hagoromo Otsutsuki was not there when Kaguya Otsutsuki came to Earth. Black Zetsu was not there when Kaguya Otsutsuki came to Earth, so the explanations about her origins and potentially even how strong she is kind of unreliable. But the biggest bombshell is the fact that Isshiki Otsutsuki came to Earth alongside Kaguya Otsutsuki, and Kaguya eventually turned against Isshiki Otsutsuki. I think one of the most important parts about this has to be the fact that Kaguya caught Isshiki Otsutsuki off guard. It wasn't necessarily like a full-on 1v1 battle, and that right there completely makes sense, because I personally believe adult Naruto and adult Sasuke would absolutely fondle Kaguya Otsutsuki, and it seems like Jigen, a weakened version of Isshiki Otsutsuki, completely demolished Naruto and Sasuke. Now, supposedly we don't really know why Kaguya Otsutsuki turned against Isshiki Otsutsuki, and I do want to point out we're going to get a little bit more information about this in the next episode or the upcoming episodes of the Boruto anime, so I'm going to try to hold back a little bit for my anime onlys out there. But regardless, she turned against Isshiki Otsutsuki. Isshiki Otsutsuki was extremely weak, and it turns out that Kaguya Otsutsuki didn't completely finish Isshiki Otsutsuki off, and then that's where we actually do get the introduction of Jigen himself. Jigen is a very interesting character just because of the sheer fact that he was alive back when Kaguya Otsutsuki was alive. I'll get into that a little bit more, but the way that Isshiki Otsutsuki actually did survive is that he shrunk himself down to a very small level, stuck into the air of Jigen, housed himself inside the body of Jigen, and absorbed his nutrients until he was absolutely 100% okay. Now, it was very interesting to find out that Isshiki Otsutsuki didn't immediately leave the karma seal back on Jigen, and it's very interesting for a very good reason. If you guys do recall, Momoshiki immediately left the karma seal back on Boruto. Amado himself said it takes a certain level of energy to leave back a karma seal. This right here potentially means to me that Momoshiki wasn't completely finished, or like he wasn't completely dead after that Rasengan or even during that Rasengan. I don't necessarily like turning my reviews into theories, but this right here is a very good one. Momoshiki Otsutsuki, before he actually did get hit with the Rasengan, seeing that Boruto had the Jogen, if he actually did see that Boruto was a part Otsutsuki, that would possibly mean that Momoshiki understands that Boruto would be an absolutely amazing vessel. Now, because we understand that there's possibly unworthy vessels, aka Jigen himself, Amado explained that Isshiki Otsutsuki can't actually reborn himself into Jigen, because if he does that, Jigen's body isn't necessarily equipped to handle all of that energy, and Isshiki Otsutsuki will be dead in a couple of days. It might be a situation that Momoshiki Otsutsuki chose a kind of unworthy vessel, whereas that vessel right there would possibly die in about 5 years. So with that foresight, like as soon as Momoshiki seen that this young kid had the Jogen, he might have thought that it would be a great idea to lose to Boruto and then give him the Karma Seal. This all spans from the fact that Momoshiki had enough energy to leave back the Karma Seal, even though we were kind of led to believe that Momoshiki was absolutely dead. This right here is absolutely interesting, but regardless, let's get back to the point with the Jigen. The confusing part about the Isshiki Otsutsuki and Jigen dynamic is the fact that this happened hypothetically over 1,000 years ago, because if you guys do recall, Kaguya Otsutsuki, when she was first roaming the earth, was over 1,000 years ago. This right here would mean the human, the monk himself, Jigen, is over 1,000 years old. That in itself is absolutely insane. And an interesting side note is the fact that Kawaki and Boruto can also potentially live for like over 1,000 years as well. But speaking of Boruto and Kawaki, their futures are now looking extremely grim, mainly because now we understand exactly what the Karma Seal is and exactly what the Karma Seal was actually meant for. The Karma Seal is essentially a backup file for Otsutsuki members when they understand that they're possibly going to die, so they can actually reborn into the vessel's body. This means that Boruto will eventually turn into Momoshiki Otsutsuki, and Kawaki will eventually turn into Isshiki Otsutsuki, and at this particular point, there is no possible reversal. So this thing right here seems inevitable. The big part about Boruto and Kawaki's transformation is going to be the timeline. Again, Isshiki Otsutsuki made the move into Jigen's body over 1,000 years ago. This leaves a big timeline. Now eventually we are going to get that timeline. Manga readers, I want you guys to calm down. We know exactly what the transformations are as of right now, but this right here was one of the things that made me extremely confused when I was actually reading it in the Boruto manga. Another interesting note from this episode is the fact that Boruto and Kawaki are progressively turning into Otsutsuki members. This right here pays dividends later on in the series of Boruto. Even in the last chapter of the Boruto manga, we've seen this right here actually take effect. Now specifically with this episode, there's a couple of things that we kind of expect to be expanded a little bit, and I personally believe the fact that we didn't necessarily get the full chapter adapted in the last episode of the Boruto manga took a lot of the possibilities of anime only scenes being added in this specific episode right here. The Kaguya and Isshiki Otsutsuki flashback was a very good candidate to possibly be expanded in this particular episode. We understand Isshiki Otsutsuki and Kaguya Otsutsuki, whenever they're going to be on screen from this point on, is going to be absolutely must-see TV, and for them to not actually take advantage of that at this particular time, it might be smart for some people, it might be a little bit disappointing for some people. The reason why it might be smart for them to not actually expand that flashback is of course to keep the lore and the interest absolutely high for Kaguya and Isshiki Otsutsuki, but obviously there's still a want for Kaguya and Isshiki Otsutsuki content. Now not only that, I thought that Boruto would kind of notice how Kashin Koji is fighting, similar to how Naruto noticed how Kashin Koji is fighting. In the Boruto manga, we didn't necessarily get to see the time slip arc when Boruto and Sasuke went back into time and actually seen Jiraiya. Very interesting part about that, side note, Sasuke never really actually seen Jiraiya back in Naruto, but that's besides the point. At this particular time in the Boruto anime, Boruto knows how Jiraiya fights, and so for him to actually call it out and say, hey, Kashin Koji fights like Jiraiya, would definitely be acceptable. I thought that right there could have possibly happened and been a very good addition. But overall, this episode right here was absolutely amazing. For me to cover all the information in about an 8 to 10 minute video is completely impossible, but I will definitely make more videos about this episode right here and explain a little bit more of the nuances explained by Amado. But let me know what you guys think about this episode in the comment section below. It's been your boy Baara B, and we out.
It's a knife.